Hi folks, it's me, your third favorite host of Sequel Decay. We here at Sequel Decay Incorporated have decided to pass on a couple of messages to you before starting this here Watchmen episode. First of all, because of audio difficulties, we were not able to record this whole episode in one go. The recording process was just too janky and scattered and basically became impossible. But we did talk about the comic enough to warrant its own episode. So this episode will be going up whenever you're hearing about it, which will be anytime after Wednesday, June 10th. However, the second part, in which we talk about the movie, the TV show, and other stuff, will be coming out at an indeterminate point in the future. It is done recording. It just needs to be edited. But because of the current sociopolitical climate and the fact that we do end up talking about it in the episode, we shouldn't be the voices being amplified right now. It should be Black and Indigenous folks on the front line of the struggle, and it should not be three non-Black people who try to elevate their voices among the others. So we're going to hold off on publishing that episode for a little while, but we will publish it at some point in the future. It's just going to be whenever we decide is the right time for it. Now, the second thing we wanted to talk to you about is the fact that in this episode, there are occasional references to sexual assault. They are not in depth. They are not graphic, but they are there. So if you'd rather skip out on those instances, we'll make a note in the description when they occur, and you know when to avoid them. But with that said, it's time to get right into the show.
I literally want a scene in Justice League where Superman and Wonder Woman have slow-mo sex on Krypton to Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah.
That would be fucking hilarious.
Oh my god.
It's fucking stupid.
So dumb.
Oh, fuck.
Guys, we're not gonna get through this if this is how it's gonna go.
That's one of the stupidest movies imaginable. Holy fuck. So I'm sure anybody listening can tell what movies we're talking about.
What movies are we talking about this week?
Legend of the Guardians, Owls of Ga'Hoole.
Ooh, good Zack Snyder content. Fuck yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's a double feature with that and Sucker Punch.
Go from a half decent animated movie that's not great to
the worst film ever made.
Arguably.
Hello, everybody.
Welcome
Do we have a cold open purge for this?
Welcome to.
That'll do.
Welcome to Sequel Decay. Welcome to Sequel Decay.
Welcome to Sequel Decay.
Welcome to Sequel Decay.
You just keep repeating it for like 5 minutes.
Welcome to Sequel Decay. Welcome to Sequel Decay. Welcome to Sequel Decay. Welcome to Sequel Decay. Welcome to Sequel Decay.
And
all right, that was terrifying.
Welcome to Sequel Decay.
Where we struggle to get through the day one cold open at a time. My name's Stefan, and joining me are Chris Ranta.
God damn it.
Adam
you
B,
cut
Chris.
out.
Adam B. Get a better headset, you nerd.
And Brandon Pollock.
Hello.
If we sound a little rusty, it's because as anybody who saw our episode on the Snyder Cut of Justice League knows, it's been a fucking while since we actually got together to record an episode. Like, this will come out.
Stuff, right?
Yeah, besides the bonus stuff, this will come out 2 weeks after the Walk Hard episode. But
it's been like almost a month.
We recorded that in late March.
Oh god,
late. Walk Hard.
Were we still in going through school, like exams and stuff when we recorded that?
No, that was over.
School.
So the end of April.
No, it was end of April. I was mistaken. That was the last time we were all in the in the same podcast, and then you and me, Chris, we did the Hellraiser episode probably I think the week after that. But since then, the only thing we've recorded is the Snyder Cut episode, even if we've maintained a consistent release schedule. So we are rusty as hell.
Oh yeah, hello
Yeah.
everybody. Welcome to what quarantine does to podcasts.
Every year, millions of podcasts around the world
It's an epidemic.
have to be put down because of quarantine related afflictions.
It cuts to like a news clip, like an interview clip of some guy like, I had a podcast once.
Yeah. We had a real original idea. Just two white dudes talking about movies. It was revolutionary. But yeah, we're back to talk about what is probably one of the most beloved nerd franchises of all time, I would say.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Like without a shadow of a doubt. We're talking about Watchmen. Now, what you might be thinking is, Watchmen is just one movie. How could you do a sequel decay on that, you idiot? You fucking moron. And I say, you fool! We're talking about not only the movie, but the original comic, multiple cuts of the movie, the Doomsday Clock sequel series, the HBO miniseries sequel series, as well as a little bit about the before Watchmen prequels and the video game. So it's
That's a lot to go through.
It's a Watchmen smorgasbord.
We're also going to review the Watchmen toaster,
As
which
well-
turns your toast into Rorschach.
Yep, as well as about 6 hours, I would say, talking about the greatest installment of Watchmen, which is Harry Partridge's Saturday Morning Watchmen.
Oh yes, the greatest iteration
Yeah.
of Watchmen I've ever seen.
Truthfully, the only canon version of Watchmen. Chris, why don't you lead us into Watchmen, the comic book?
Rorschach's Journal, October 12th, 1985.
That's pretty close, dude. That's pretty close. That's pretty good, I'm not gonna lie.
Okay,
I
so
think she's just like a 40-year-old smoker. Rorschach's Journal. Sorry, go ahead.
no, he's like, honestly, the movie should have had Rorschach sounding like an aging, fucking chain-smoking 60-year-old housewife. Rorschach's Journal, October 13th, 1985. Meeting with Vite left bad taste in mouth. He is pampered and decadent, betraying even his shallow liberal affections. Possibly homosexual? Must remember to investigate further.
Okay, we get the idea. Now that we've got the episode off to a solid start. Chris, for the love of fuck, lead us into Watchmen.
Okay. Watchmen is a 12-issue comic series that ran from September 1986 to October 1987, and it was written by Alan Moore and illustrated by Dave Gibbons. If you have lived under a rock for the last few decades, it's one of the greatest pieces of comic ever made. If I'd honestly argue it's one of the greatest pieces of literature ever made. But basically the plot of the comic is there was this team of vigilantes in the mid 1970s that got disbanded because of the Keene Act, which outlawed all superheroes and vigilantes. And one of them was murdered via being thrown out his window, which leads to a vast conspiracy a la any neo-noir led by I guess like detective stand-in Rorschach, as he tries to piece together and convince the other crime busters — they're not called the Watchmen, they're called the crime busters — that, you know, there's some shady shit afoot. And from there, it's just beautiful.
Yep. So, one thing that is like kind of necessary to talk about whenever you talk about Watchmen is the state of the comic book industry, and specifically superhero comics themselves. So, like, comic book history is generally divided into ages. So you have the golden age of comic books, which is ranges from about the late 30s into the 40s, which is like when superheroes like Superman, Batman, Captain America, when they first started emerging, and they have a very specific tone. And then by the Silver Age, which I believe was more the 50s and 60s, the government censorship was enacted upon the comic book industry, which ended up pretty much killing the horror comic industry, on a side note.
Yeah.
But it's superhero comics adapted by making them like extremely goofy and with very I don't want to say black and white moralities because that implies something grittier, but like not very complicated stories. They're just kind of goofy fun. This is where you get like the really ridiculous issues of Superman and Adam West Batman. And once you get into the 60s, though, you see the emergence of Marvel Comics, which is still very much Silver Age and goofy, but does try to incorporate more mature themes with well, not necessarily mature themes, but a little more depth with characters like Spider-Man, X-Men, the Incredible Hulk especially. um but once you get to the 70s and 80s, you get into what's called the Bronze Age, which was when they it was still, there was still censorship, but people were starting to kind of skirt around it or outright ignore it more to tell stories that were more mature. So you have stuff like The Night Gwen Stacy Died, a lot of Spider-Man stories actually. You had a lot of the X-Men stories that dealt with bigotry. And then in 1986, that's when Watchmen comes out and basically changes the game forever. uh Watchmen comes out and it's this very dark, like on surface level very bleak and not necessarily ultra violent, but very brutal and almost sleazy and sexual, and dealing with topics such as political oppression, sexuality, bigotry, sexual assault. Honestly, like dark superhero stories have been done since then, but before Watchmen, there was absolutely nothing like it, and it helped spark kind of a wave of other comics that kind of put a darker, more cerebral spin on superhero comics. So you have stuff like Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns, Alan Moore's The Killing Joke, Frank Miller's Daredevil Born Again, among countless others, and then some of the not good imitators, which we'll get into in a bit. Now, the other thing you have to remember is the author of Watchmen, the best boy,
Rest in
Alan
voice.
Moore. Alan Moore, at this point, had mostly been working for DC Comics, I believe.
Mostly,
And
yeah.
yeah, and he had been doing. I don't know if this is Watchmen was before or after Swamp Thing. I think it was after.
I think it was after, yeah.
But he had been known for kind of taking superheroes and kind of putting like a more mature cerebral spin on it. So at this point, I don't have the timelines completely 100%, but he's also known for Saga of the Swamp Thing, which is phenomenal. For The Man Who Has Everything, which is very considered one of the best Superman stories and a very mature one. Um, V for Vendetta, From Hell, which I don't believe was DC. I could be wrong though. League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Sorry.
That I forget who did From Hell. I don't think League of Extraordinary Gentlemen was DC either.
No, but you know he did write it. Uh,
Of course.
and then releases Watchmen in 1986. He comes up with a concept. DC gets Dave Gibbons to draw it. It comes out, and we'll get into it later, but the kind of franchiseification of Watchmen is something very tied into Alan Moore's personal opinions on the comic book industry. Like, he is known for his very particular views on adaptations of his work, being that he doesn't recognize them and he hates them all. Uh, and that's all stuff that we're gonna go that we'll get into. But all this to say, Alan Moore takes a very critical eye to the superhero genre with Watchmen. At the risk of monopolizing the mic too much, this movie also comes out. This comic book also comes out in the mid '80s, which is a extremely politically turbulent time.
Mm.
The Vietnam War has been over for a while, but it is an absolute stain on the United States.
Yeah.
The war on Afghanistan, I don't know if it had started at this point, but it was going to start. If it hadn't started already. And the Soviet Union was in its decline, which would eventually result in its breakup. Ronald Reagan was the president of the United States. Margaret Thatcher in the United Kingdom. Authoritarian conservatism was the
The
norm.
rage. We're right at the tail end of the Cold War now, too.
Yep.
Right as things were getting really fucking tense.
This comic is very much born out of that era. Like reading it, the events almost feel like a new Red Scare. It even it seems to examine like the very threat of nuclear annihilation itself through the character of Dr. Manhattan. Narrowing it down a bit, the characters in Watchmen like bear a very striking significance to actual comic book characters. And that's because shortly before Watchmen came out, DC had bought a bunch of old comic book characters from Charlton Comics. So Alan Moore had originally wanted to use those characters, but DC didn't want to lock them into this new continuity he was making. So he had to make up his own, and he basically made up characters that were basically just copies. So you have Rorschach being a copy of The Question, Night Owl being a copy of Blue Beetle, Silk Spectre being a copy of Nightshade, Ozymandias being a copy of Thunderbolts, Dr. Manhattan being a copy of Captain Atom, and Comedian being a copy of Peacemaker. And from that, you kind of get the character molds being deconstructed in Watchmen. One of you please jump in. I've been talking forever. Hello?
No, keep going. I was actually really engaged in what you were talking about.
So was I.
Oh, okay. Okay, cool. I'm very flattered. Now, there's a shitload of characters in Watchmen, and we're not going to be able to give each character their due just
No.
because,
Well, just too many.
we that, and also Craig only allows recordings up to 6 hours, so we're going to have to pace ourselves a bit.
Yeah.
But I think there's 3 characters I think that people kind of have the most divergent opinions on in Watchmen, and those would be Rorschach, Dr. Manhattan, and the Comedian.
Yeah.
Like, Watchmen has an extremely gray morality to it.
Oh my god.
Like,
Exactly.
there is no real character that like is heroic in the traditional sense. Even the more like heroic characters, which would probably be Dan as the second Night Owl or Laurie as Silk Spectre, they are supremely fucked up individuals who are barely good people.
That's the thing. Like, it's this huge theme of this book is that like even the air quotes good guys in the eyes of society can still be. I don't think bad is the correct word to use here, but like just
Disturbed.
Yeah, that's a good word to use. Fucked up.
Yeah. So which of these characters do you guys want to tackle first? Because we could pretty much pick one and run with it.
The Comedian is a piece of shit.
The Comedian is a very good one.
He is. Oh my god.
The Comedian is interesting because,
well, your first introduction to him is him being thrown out of a window.
Yeah, he's the character who dies immediately prior to the events of the comic, and his death is kind of the impetus for all the events of the comic. And in the second chapter, all the characters kind of look back on his life, and he seems to have like a very not like a very openly gray morality where to him everything is a fucking joke, so he might as well embrace his monstrous behavior. He's a rapist, he is a mass murderer, he commits genocide, he's generally the worst person alive, but
he shoots and guns down a pregnant lady.
Yeah, because, to him, life is a joke. And, like, you can see that kind of outlook being attractive to, I don't know, people who, like, are reading this comic for, the edge of it all. But then there's a very particular scene at the end of chapter 2 from the perspective of Edward Jacoby, who's the old supervillain Moloch, who describes a scene where the Comedian has a complete breakdown of his morality, essentially. Like, he is basically just crying and sobbing like a little kid and begging for his mother to forgive him. We'll talk about it closer to the end of our discussion, but people try to paint this as like a very nihilistic comic book, and I don't think that's true at all. And in fact, I think the Comedian is a good representation of the kind of contradictory bleakness of this book as a whole, because he's this very bleak, ultra-violent character who, at his morality is like, it's not that the world is a joke, it's that his view, by the end he realizes that his own morality is a joke.
Mm-hmm.
And the joke was on him. I'm very deep.
Okay.
Well, and everything you said is pretty much exactly dead on. Like, he realizes at the end of his life that his morality was the joke and that the joke's all on him. He's this depraved, disgusting monster who deserves no sympathy and no forgiveness. I think that's just something
Mhm.
with all the characters too, is that no matter how despicable or fucked up they are, there's still something about them where you go, okay, I get that. And with the comedian, yeah, it's just that looking back on your life and looking back on your legacy and kind of going, well, what the fuck did I do with my life? We could look at it as an argument of like how he took his life for granted or how he took other people's lives for granted, because at the end of the day, and I think this is the best way to sum up the comedian in a nutshell, is he's a fucking nihilist.
Yeah.
He's an extreme nihilist who couldn't give two shits about anything or anyone and just despises the world, despises everything around him. Maybe you could make the argument that he was lashing out in his own way, but I could also make that argument about every single character in the book.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like
Mhm.
he's this nihilistic that doesn't give a shit about anything except towards one person,
Yeah.
which is Lori.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think Lori is kind of his tether. I don't know how to phrase it, like a morality pet. Like,
It's his tether to his humanity almost. I would say.
yeah, but even like his relationship with Lori is so, I mean, she outright hates him and he is conflicted by it because he had tried to rape her mother. So he, every time he sees her, there's this constant reminder of that. And also when he was in Vietnam, he got this Vietnamese woman pregnant and then murdered her, like you mentioned, Brandon. But
Mhm.
before he murdered her, she slashed his face with a bottle, so he has to look at that all the time too.
Yeah,
And
he has emotional scars as well as constant physical scars that keep reminding him of all his past horrible
Yeah.
things he's done.
yeah, he does correctly identify some things though. Like he identifies that he does identify correctly that everything is fucked up, and fair enough. Like this is a dystopia.
Yes.
Yeah, but I
And
think what's wrong with his ideology is that in a sense he acknowledges how fucked up everything is, but he willingly embraces it. Like, you can acknowledge how fucked up everything is around you, but when you're willingly adding to the problem, then who the fuck are you to say that?
yeah, that's the
Mhm.
thing. Comedian accepts that he's the problem, and then so like just becomes this irredeemable monster. But even if he does like correctly point out like, I don't know, the flawed morality of somebody like a Captain Metropolis who absolutely bodies in the Crime Busters meeting. Or his very telling line when Night Owl asks what happened to the American dream when they're breaking up a riot, and
Yeah,
he
and he said it
says,
came true.
yeah, it came true, you're looking at it, which
Exactly.
very true, like in that
Yeah.
book and in real life. But you only do so much by recognizing that it exists and pointing it out when you're contributing to it yourself.
Yeah.
And at the end, like he is completely spiritually and morally decayed, and he realizes how, like, he does feel genuine remorse, but he's what, like going on, like getting close to 70 years old by the end of his life. Like there's nothing he can do to redeem anything he's done, and it just absolutely breaks him.
Well, exactly, and that's the thing, right? Is that he's one of those people who is just unforgivable, except by someone who has literally every reason in the world to hate him.
Yeah,
And she ends up being the one who forgives him and is actually in love with him, because we're talking about
yeah,
Laurie's mother, the original Silk Spectre.
Sally
Yeah.
Jupiter, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And that just kind of goes to show, like, one of the general themes of this book is like people are fucking complicated. Like
Mm.
there's no like kind of silver age black and white morality of good and evil, or even like,
Yeah, it's not like comic books now.
I mean, comic books now do tend to have more of a gray outlook than before. Like, remember, this book is mostly commentating on what came before it.
Hmm.
But with Sally Jupiter, like, yeah, you have this character who has every reason to hate the comedian, and yet she still somehow falls in love with him and has a child with him. And like, if you try to ascribe logic to that situation, like, obviously you're gonna come up short because you can't rationalize it. It's just this kind of weird human
Well, it's one of those
human
things,
decision.
right? Like people constantly say, "Oh, you can't control who you fall in love with." I'm a firm believer in that.
Certainly, like even and it's tough with a discussion of sexual assault because
Yes, it really is.
like you can't really tiptoe around it, especially in this comic book that is so like in your face about it.
Especially
But
considering the impact it has on, well, not only the original Silk Spectre's life, but Laurie's life and how it affects her, going forward.
what it boils down to is that people are fucking complicated. That's what the book is saying here.
Yeah.
And
Oh yeah, exactly.
you can't always rationalize what goes on in their heads because humans are not rational beings.
No, which is a huge theme of this fucking book.
Hey, speaking of rational beings, Rorschach.
Rorschach, yeah.
You know, the one superhero that's free of mental disorders, as he claims.
Oh yeah, totally, completely free. It's not like he, sets a guy on fire or anything.
Yeah, no, it's not like.
Mind you, he probably deserved it, but like that's beside the point.
I was gonna say, speaking of characters who are products of their environment, yeah, we should absolutely talk about Rorschach, who is, I think, more so than the comedian, a product of his environment. Like someone who, because of his childhood trauma, because of his abusive mother, because of his upbringing, because of the people who bullied him, he's had felt that he's had no choice but to lash out against society. To an extent, you really do kind of feel bad for him, and I think he's one of the. I'm not saying sympathetic in the sense that I think he's a good person, but like sympathetic in the sense of
No, you can relate to him.
You can relate to him. Well, not relate, but like you can understand.
Yeah.
Well, here's the thing.
Exactly where he's
there's
coming from.
100%. There's 100% people like all over the world who have had that childhood of where they had an abusive mother or had a parent who slept around a lot and didn't treat them with the same, how you should be treated as a kid, and because of that, they get bullied and all this stuff. So all these things that they do happen. It's just Rorschach is a specific case where he thinks that that is happening to him is because of society and not necessarily those people individually.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
he ascribes this like deep perversion and depravity to society that, you know, a good psychologist will point out that it's definitely just a product of his upbringing, but it's severely scarred him. Like he's way too invested in other people's sex lives and sexuality.
Well,
He's
it's even at the point where he doesn't even consider himself as his actual person anymore. He said, I'm no longer
Kovacs.
what's it, Kovacs. I am now Rorschach."
Yeah. He considers the mask to be his face, which is, I mean, that's a superhero trope, but it's really fucked up.
Especially when considering he's yelling at it to the freaking guidance counselor.
Yeah, he is an outright fascist, essentially. The only people he really relates to or trusts are the New Frontiersman, which is this far right newspaper. He frequently badmouths communists, liberals, racial minorities. He basically calls his landlord a welfare queen at one point.
One part I actually really liked is where there's one scene where he sort of became self-aware of how he is when he was talking to Dan. And he's like, "I'm sorry. I know I can be a lot to handle sometimes.
Yeah.
You're a good friend." And so like when you see stuff like that, like while he has that character arc of being this fascist, this terrible person, you can't help but be like, "Aw." You know what I mean?
I don't know about but
he at least feels something.
yeah.
I shouldn't say
he's not just this black and white, no emotion person that he's been depicted as. Once that scene happens, you realize, okay, he is still a human being in some form.
Yeah. Like, I think, honestly, the only, I guess, morally right thing he tries to do is tell the world about what Ozymandias did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that more comes to like one of his few good traits of sticking to what he believes in, which is a double-edged sword.
Yeah, because he believes a lot of fucked up things.
Because he believes a lot of fucked up things, but
yeah,
like he's one of those people that will not back down to anybody. He stands up for what he believes in, no matter how shitty it is, and yeah, like he's clearly a product of not only his upbringing but also his environment because of how he treats other people. Like you said, ethnic minorities, the way he treats sexuality, the way he treats, well, anybody really, especially like middle lower class people.
Yeah. Like one thing to him is that he treats everyone the same. And that's just shitty.
But there is an exception though. Like he actually is a pretty big fan of the comedian.
Yeah.
Uh, because he considers him like a morally upstanding person who never backed down, even after he learned that he did. And like he goes so far as to when Laurie tells him that the comedian tried to rape her mother, he dismisses it as a moral lapse. Like he couldn't possibly care less.
Yeah.
So in that sense, Rorschach is actually a massive hypocrite.
Oh yes. I'll
But
say
again,
this one though.
humans are not consistent.
Well, no, of course not. Well, and then another thing about Rorschach is that he, no matter what happens, if there's an injustice, if there's any kind of injustice done to something, he sticks to his guns.
Yeah.
And he makes sure that justice is served in his own way, whether that's killing the person or sending him back when he was not so cynical, sending him to prison.
Like that's the thing is like again with Rorschach, like these things that we call his better qualities, like that's
They're still horrible.
Yeah, like you have to keep in mind as an audience member that we're saying better qualities in loose terms.
Yes.
Like again,
he's not a good person.
As we said about sticking up to his morals and his beliefs, it comes down to again like a lot of his morals and beliefs are incredibly shitty. Justice being served, well, for all we know, we don't really know a lot of the people that he put away. We don't really know if they were set up or if
exactly.
were...
He treats a first degree murder, someone who commits first degree murder the same as someone who steals a pack of gum from the store.
Well, that's exactly it. Like his views on justice again.
It's completely black and white.
You can, they're not black and white. It's just that they're like you can sort of admire his views on trying to have, I guess, a moral ground on what is good and what is evil. But the thing is that, again, and this comes back to every single character, it's not consistent. Mm-hmm. It's not perfect. Everything is flawed and contradictory.
Well, and also like
you can poke holes in everyone's argument.
Well, and he'll this is also the same guy too who will look for something to put you away or look for something to make you look guilty. Like when he was talking to Moloch to try to get information, there was nothing that the Moloch guy was in prison for 10 years and he's like a 70, 80-year-old man. He's not going to fucking do anything.
Yeah, completely rehabilitated and dying
completely
of cancer.
Rehabilitated. But Rorschach goes and talks to him and then inexplicably on purpose goes to find these illegal pills he's make for his cancer treatment.
Yeah.
And says, "Oh, you have illegal pills. I guess I got to take you in or kill you." Like it's just like, what is this guy gonna do? He's a 80-year-old cancer patient. He's gonna die of cancer.
Yeah, he's trying to survive, and I think that's something that Rorschach doesn't understand. Is that, and again, I think it's more something Rorschach doesn't just understand about other people, but also doesn't understand about himself.
Mm-hmm.
Is that everyone's trying their best to survive, and yeah, obviously not everything everyone's going to do is perfect or good, but at that point in their lives they thought that was the best thing to do. Case in point with Moloch, like getting all these illegal pills so that he can keep up his cancer treatment because he wants to live,
or at least die with less pain.
Exactly. And
not die in prison, basically.
Not die in prison, not die completely alone, and not die in so much pain, like Stefan said. Again, there's also a flaw in that argument because, some look at the comedian and how he tried to rape Sally. We can't make an argument that was him just trying to survive. That was just him being a fucking asshole.
He's being a horny asshole,
Yeah, he's just being a piece of shit. This is going to be probably the most human episode of the podcast we ever do. Because basically we're going to make a point and go, oh shit, but also there's a lot of contradictions here in our argument.
Yeah.
And that's the human race.
Pretty apt, yeah.
But I think that's what's so beautiful about the book is that it's so human in the sense that it completely understands the human psyche and it completely understands how humans feel and how humans interact and how humans how they work and how they function and how they behave and how they believe and how they think. And
because some stories you read, you're like, oh, I can't see people saying this at all. This is not how people talk. This is not how the situation would go. But that's one thing I'll say. The writing of this fucking comic book is amazing.
Oh yeah, Alan Moore's a genius.
He is
Brandon,
such a good writer.
Brandon, you need to read like V for Vendetta. You need to read a Swamp Thing run.
Well,
'cause
I've
it's
like,
so
I've
fucking
seen
good.
V for Vendetta.
No,
you
read the
have
book.
not read it though.
Read
haven't
the book.
read it.
It's so
Yeah.
much better.
I mean, I've really, really, really enjoyed the movie, so I'll probably take you up on that. But
Like, absolutely read The Killing Joke if you get a chance. Read League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Read Lost Girls. Read anything,
Hell.
really. From Hell, yeah, exactly. Like,
mhm.
read Alan Moore because he's so fucking good at writing, and he's so goddamn smart. And
Oh, dude, like,
there's-
like I literally have like pictures on my phone of some of the lines. Like Rorschach, for example, one of his just to like get a kind of look into his psyche. One of the lines of his journal is, "I leave the human cockroaches to discuss their heroin and child pornography. I have business elsewhere with a better class of person." Like,
well, and
That's
and even
despicable, but I
then,
love that line.
me too.
well, and even then, there's also that famous line like early on in the book where he's like, "The world will look up and shout, 'Save us,' and I'll look down and whisper, 'No.'"
No, yeah.
Mhm.
Like, he's someone who, again, like, that line can represent so many things in the sense that he's he's lashed out so much against everything and everyone around him that he's completely abandoned everybody. Or
Well,
you
I feel
can,
like that's because he feels like everyone's abandoned him. Like,
well, and that's exactly it. Like, he feels like everyone's abandoned him, so why not abandon everyone else? But it also shows like his massive ego
oh yeah,
and his narcissism as a vigilante.
yeah.
And also his hypocrisy, because again, we come back to coming back to that whole thing about how he's so despicably bitter against like lower middle class people, ethnic minorities, people who express their sexuality in one way or another. And the thing
Anybody to the
is
left
that
of Ronald Reagan.
anyone to the left of Ronald Reagan, really.
Mm.
And the thing that Rorschach doesn't realize is that he technically is to the left of Ronald Reagan, and that the people he looks up to either don't give a shit about him or fucking despise him.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the most beautiful contradictions in the entire book.
And we'll get more, I think, when we talk about into the movie, we'll talk about more of like kind of the popular distortions of Rorschach's character.
Oh, absolutely.
Talk about
But
it even more when we get into the series.
yeah, but well, let's for now let's just move on to another character. I want to talk really quickly about Night Owl and Silk Spectre because I feel like they're fantastic characters in their own right, but
Yeah.
they don't get as much attention as your Rorschachs or your comedians or your Dr. Manhattans
Well,
or
no,
even
because
Ozymandias.
as much as Dan and Laurie are main huge characters and are important to the story, they're not extremists like the comedian and Rorschach are. You know what I'm trying to say?
No.
Like they're not super
Well,
violent or think that everything is a joke, or at least not at first. Like
Mhm.
when you first introduced to Dan, he's just meeting up with an old friend. He seems like a really normal guy. You know, has a day job,
But
stuff like
he's also
that.
deeply fucked up.
But he's also deeply, deeply disturbed.
I think I have more to say about Laurie than I do about Dan.
Yeah.
I'll pick up the slack on Dan's end.
Oh, good. But we'll start with Dan, and
Okay.
Stefan, you'll lead us off, bitch.
Okay. Thanks, you fucking. Dan and Laurie are kind of special in the sense that I believe they're the only two legacy heroes. And that's
Yeah.
also a common trope of superhero comics. Like you have multiple Blue Beetles, you have 3 of them. You have multiple Robins, you have multiple Flashes. Like legacy heroes are kind of a common trope. Dan Dryberg's predecessor was Hollis Mason, who is kind of this golden age Blue Beetle counterpart who now runs a mechanic shop, but also deeply longs for the days of being a superhero, even if he won't admit as much.
Well, and I think Dan does to an extent. I think
Definitely.
Hollis is much more open about it, whereas I think Dan's more shut off about it.
Well, he doesn't want to admit it to himself because
Exactly, because he knows what it was like, and I know he wants to distance himself from it, but we also know damn well that he misses it.
Yes.
Yeah.
It comes back to that theme of like nostalgia and how again, like when we look back at Star Wars, we feel like we're young again, but for Dan, it's him being a vigilante that makes him feel young again, that makes him feel energized, that makes him feel like he's indestructible.
Well,
Honestly,
in it stands like a 40-year-old man or something like that.
He's 44.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's like in his mid 40s.
Yeah, so
And
he's
he's
literally in the
not
middle
in
of a
good
midlife
shape.
crisis. Yeah, literally in the middle of a midlife crisis.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Honestly, like there are some points where I was reading, and there was a lot of parallels between Dan's relationship to vigilantism and like a drug addiction.
Yes.
Oh
Like
yeah.
he's constantly lying to himself about how much he wants it, and once he does have it, it kind of changes his demeanor
Well,
entirely.
and Rorschach even calls him out on it at the beginning, like in the first chapter or two, or yeah, sorry, the first chapter when he's going around and warning everybody about the mass killer.
Yeah.
He goes down, he's like, "Oh, look at you stuck in your basement, hiding away from the world," or kind of something along those lines.
Yeah, and it's implied that like him not being able to, forgive me for the mental image, but release himself through being a superhero, like it's kind of ruined him as a person. He's kind of this, as Rorschach calls him, like a pathetic, flabby failure.
Yeah.
Which is pretty harsh because, like, honestly, it seems like a pretty normal existence, but he clearly feels unfulfilled and depressed. And it's not until Laurie comes back into his life and he starts violently beating the shit out of people, it's like he starts to get some of that vitality back. In fact, like, I don't know if either of you guys noticed this, but in that scene where Dan and Laurie beat up those muggers in the alleyway, there's a lot of sexual tension in that.
Oh,
Yeah,
oh
absolutely.
yeah,
Like at the end, like they're just like, if they were in bed together, it would be like they were just breathing heavily and
they were
looking at
gonna
each
fuck.
other. There's a lot of there's a lot there. And
Oh yeah.
I
Oh, yeah,
mean,
the sexual tension between them is palpable, even when we're just reading it, let alone like watching it.
watching it, you don't
Well,
get it at all, I don't think. But
I,
I
I
don't
I
know.
was gonna say that's one downfall about the movie is the way that they treat Dan,
yeah.
because you just kind of get the feeling like, oh, he's just kind of depressed,
Yeah, exactly.
whereas the book really fleshes it out.
In fact, like actually the most like not subtle, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but the not subtle indication of Dan's like kind of literal impotence is the fact that he can't get hard
Yeah, he
until
literally can't
after
have sex.
like he's been a superhero and gone out in his owl ship and saved a bunch of people. Then he's able to have sex with Lori.
On the ship.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
there's a really clever moment, or not, I don't know about clever, but funny moment where like the owl ship they accidentally hit the flamethrower button like right when he's finishing, and it's a funny moment in the comic, and then, well, we'll get to it.
I'll get to it. We're gonna
Oh,
spend an hour on it.
we will. But yeah, Dan. It's a shame that Dan doesn't get as much attention because he's actually kind of a fascinating character, even if he's not quite on the level of somebody like Dr. Manhattan or Rorschach. Chris, do you want to talk about Laurie?
I absolutely do. I'd like to keep in mind to our lovely audience of nobody that we are three men and we should not be analyzing women for shit because we're not women. But
Probably not. No.
um, I'm uh, I'm gonna take the leap of faith, and I'm gonna talk about a Goyle.
Okay, Chris. Talk about the Goyle.
I think that's what Laurie ultimately ends up representing is the objectification of women in superhero comics and superhero media in general.
Mhm.
Like especially
Her
like
mother too.
her mother too, but more so like Laurie's kind of a product of it and the one who has to really conflict with it.
Mhm.
Um, like, and again, like Alan Moore is not predicting the future; he's commenting on the past, but the future hasn't really changed much since the past. Like, look at
No.
how Scarlett Johansson as Black Widow is objectified,
Oh
or even
Mhm.
gosh.
Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman.
Looking at the broader nerd culture, look at how much people freak out if like people suggest that, hey, maybe like Power Girl shouldn't have like a massive triangle showing off all her tits, like, and then
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
yeah.
Well, I think
But
I'm really glad, like, for another example of that, like, I'm really glad they didn't go with like Scarlet Witch's original costume,
Which is fucking ridiculous.
which is
Yeah.
ridiculous. Have you seen it?
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
fucking stupid.
It's like a bathing suit.
Yeah.
It's
That's
not
But
pretty
this.
generous.
It's not the cool thing you see on the Marvel MCU movies anymore. Like, which is, a nice long red like trench coat or whatever it is. I
I
don't know
actually really
exactly.
do like that design.
I do
But
too. No,
Chris,
her outfit's cool, but like
yeah,
the original one is literally like a tank top and some panties. Like,
well,
that's being generous.
and
But Chris, keep going.
that's being gentle, yes. But like even look at like Wonder Woman's costume design in like Justice League and Batman v Superman, both films directed by a man, or the way that Black Widow's been depicted in basically all of the MCU. Again, in movies depicted by, well, like especially in the first Avengers and Age of Ultron. Again, movies directed by men. Also, movies directed by people who were involved in Justice League. We're
Also,
really bringing it back, boys.
Also, Joss Whedon.
Yes, everyone's favorite feminist, Joss Whedon, the man who cheated on his wife with multiple women while also saying he was a feminist. Intelligent motherfucker,
Yeah.
Joss Whedon.
Big brain.
Big boy brain.
That big boy brain energy on Joss Whedon.
Big boy brain energy. BBBE.
That sounds like a fucking venereal disease.
It really does.
No. That sounds like Elon Musk's new baby name.
What is it? I remember it being. What was his new kid's name? I can't remember what it is.
It's like
I'm looking it up.
Zaire. No, it's like Zaire A12 or whatever. Like, fuck. He's such a useless asshole.
Elon Musk might be the stupidest person on the planet.
Mr.
This is the same guy. This is the same guy who said, "Oh, my stocks are too high," and then.
Mr. I'm gonna go on Twitter and bitch about my stocks and watch the whole world crash and burn. You stupid motherfucker.
Hold on, listen to this. In a Tesla and space CEO Musk announced the birth of a baby boy and posted on Twitter revealing his son was called X, that weird A/E symbol from Greek words, A-12 Musk. like I want to hold on. Look at this. This is his name. Look at the chat right now. That's his fucking name.
I can't.
No, hold on. They had to change it because of the laws in California.
Yeah.
They can't have numbers anymore. So it's actually more like this. It's the Roman numeral for 12 now, so they can get away with it. He's such a fucking idiot.
No, he did change it because you're not allowed to use numbers in your name.
Exactly, yeah, you
So
have to
he
use
did-
letters to like
he changed
the
it.
Roman numerals,
He
yeah.
changed
I
it to
can't-
Roman numerals.
I can't fucking believe people think he's smart. I can't fucking believe it.
It's like he took a calculator and pressed 3 random buttons and he's like, all right, that's a name.
No. Apparently, no. Grimes explained it on Twitter. It's so poetic and real, you know.
Did he like mansplain the name to her too?
Yeah, he mansplained it. No, bitch. Actually, this airplane, not that one. You.
The A in the name also represents Archangel, which she described as her favorite song.
Oh, shut the fuck up.
That's my
Fucking rich
favorite.
people, I swear to fucking Christ.
That's my favorite song from Back to the Future, actually. Archangel, Archangel, will you be Grimes?
Oh my god. Oh my fucking god. What were we talking about?
Lori,
I'm completely lost. I'm completely
We were
lost.
talking about fucking Lori.
We somehow got the Elon Musk child name. How do we get here? How does this always happen? How come every episode we fucking record, we end up talking about the stupidest fucking thing that happens in the news like last week?
Do you remember when I bitched to you guys all night last night going, we need to stay on topic, we need to stay on topic?
The fucking text from Stefan the other day, we already no distractions, otherwise it's going to be a 6-hour episode.
No distractions, it's going to be firmly grasping.
I'll make a fucking exception for shitting on Elon Musk. I don't care.
That is the one and only exception.
Well,
Shitting on
Stefan,
Elon
in
Musk.
that case, coming up next, we're going to bitch about Jeff Bezos.
I mean, sure.
Boy. Talk about Bill Gates while we're at it.
Yeah, fuck them all.
You know what? Let's just go beat him up. Let's just
Toss him into a fucking pit and have a cook-off.
cook-off.
Yes,
Put him in one of his rockets and send him into space and leave him there.
Fly Me to the Moon by Frank Sinatra's playing in the background.
It's Fly Me to the Moon by Frank Sinatra, but it's just Elon Musk floating dead in space.
Oh my god. I'm just imagining Elon Musk just like T-posing as he floats through space.
No. He's T-bowing. Like
Oh
the Tim
god.
Tebow pose.
Oh fuck off.
Bring it back to 2012, baby. Anyway, we're now gonna bring it back to 1986, and we're gonna
Speaking
talk
of
about
Lori.
Lori.
Jesus fucking Christ. Oh, I'm sweating. God.
I can't. I'm fucking dying, dude.
Or
Oh.
wait till we somehow relate before Watchmen to Don Kosiak.
Oh God.
So Lori.
Mm-hmm.
Lori.
That was terrifying.
What I was gonna say about Lori, and I think she's one of those characters that, I mean, clearly nobody talks about her, but I think what's really interesting about her is that she has one of the most complex character arcs in the entire fucking book, and
Oh yeah.
nobody talks about her.
Yeah.
Because
Well, she's a part of everyone's story at some point.
well, and it wasn't even that. It's that her character arc is basically her having to guide herself alone through the blatant sexism of America, and also like the fact that she needs to cope with her mother's sexual assault practically on her own. And she has to accept that this is a thing that happened and deal with it on her own and be able to cope with it on her own, because even her mother has moved on from it and she was the victim.
Her mother has gone the opposite direction and is actually
Yeah,
forgiven him.
exactly. Her mother's gone the opposite direction, completely forgiven him, absolved him of his sins even. And again, that comes back to what we were talking about earlier about human nature. But with Lori, it's really just this tragic and really all like super depressing look at how women are treated in Western society, and how women are treated as these second class citizens that are objectified and abused and just
Oh, and
degraded.
that's extremely evident considering like even like think about her position at the GS labs or whatever, where she's literally her only job is to make sure that Dr. Manhattan is pleased. Part of that probably being sexually.
Well,
Yeah.
and that's exactly it. Like, yeah, like she,
Her entire job is to make the
like,
man happy.
yeah,
Mhm.
her entire job is to make, not even just the man, but like, again, like when we look at Dr. Manhattan through the lens of Lori, like, especially because, again, like Dr. Manhattan is often perceived throughout the entire book as a god. But, sorry, I said book, I meant to say comic. I honestly fucking hate the fact, and I know I'm not the only one that said this, I hate the fact that DC is treating Watchmen like it was a fucking graphic novel. It's a comic book. Fuck off. But with Lori, yeah, like she often feels like a servant to the men in her life, either as a sexual object or as, in Dr. Manhattan's case, a support tool, even in Dan's case, a support tool, because she often rewards his despicable behavior, especially later on in the comic, with sex.
Well, here's the thing, though. Is I feel like at least with her, like her and Dan's relationship, I feel like he also supports her because she hasn't
Oh yeah,
been
no, he
treated.
also
You
he
know,
also supports her. I think the thing with Dr. Manhattan is that he's so, and we're going to talk about this later. The thing with Dr. Manhattan is that he's so emotionally distant. He kind of gives a fuck about humanity, but he also really doesn't.
because of his perception of time, he thinks everything is preordained, which is why he doesn't feel a certain way to anything that happens.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Like Dr. Manhattan is merely a slave to the quote unquote progression of humanity, when really it's ultimately just a regression.
Even he
Um,
too. Even he is just a tool in America's arsenal.
Oh yeah.
Like
oh yeah,
he's basically
precisely.
just a giant a walking nuke.
But and this is ironic because now we're taking this thing that was supposed to be about a woman and now framing it around a man. So now I feel like a sexist
Oops.
asshole.
Whoops.
I mean, I feel like the
I'm
book does that more than we
no, no,
are.
no, 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 no. I think the book has a lot to say about Lori, and it really pisses me off that like nobody really talks about how tragic her arc is, because yeah, like
Oh yeah.
she's ultimately a slave to a society, or not even, sorry, I don't want to say that word because of Joker, a system. Like I think her arc is really interesting, and again, it's I feel like I'm just kind of repeating a lot of the same points, but yeah, like it's just an absolute shame that like nobody really talks about her, because again, I think Alan Moore has a lot to say about, sexism in the Western world, especially in America, especially in the comic industry, especially in media in general. And the thing is that not only was he right back then, but he's right about now. Now the more I think about it, the more I think she's one of my favorite characters to dissect in the book. And I really hope to God that I find a BuzzFeed think piece about how Laurie's a great character later on.
So before we move on to the big blue guy, what do we have to say about Ozymandias? Because he's an odd one.
I guess the same things that we said about Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos.
Pretty much. I mean,
He's
he's got.
He does remind me a lot of like a big company CEO.
Yeah, he's like the capitalist who wants to save the world.
Yeah, he's
Oh,
exactly. It's exactly what he is.
No, he's the hyper capitalist that wants to save the world. He has a fucking toy line out of his own brand. Not even just his own brand, but also like the other crime busters in general. Like at least in the movie, I don't remember so much in the book. But like there's that line in the comic where he's like, cancel the toy line or something because I have no enemies or something like that.
Yeah,
It's
he's
Like he's such a despicable fuck, and all he thinks about is the bottom dollar. And not even just the bottom dollar, but also just it also comes down to the fact that hyper capitalists seem to think that they control the world.
it really does kind of come down to the like this kind of narcissistic god complex, and I don't remember if it's assumed that that was there before he got all his money, but he does seem to think like, because he is who he is, it's his duty to save the world. And
Yeah.
unfortunately he also has the capacity to, you know enforce this very cynical view of humanity, that humanity is savage and that
Well, yeah.
without the proper guidance it will destroy itself, and in this case the proper guidance means
Yeah.
killing 3 million people.
Well, and also like he has one of the hugest egos of all time. Like he clearly thinks that he has to do everything himself, and that any other people's ideas are stupid because he's what self-proclaimed smartest man in the world.
I think what's also really interesting is like you can look at him through the lens of like someone like a Steve Jobs, in the sense of like the quote unquote smartest man in the world thing. But also you can look at him through the lens of like every fucking award season when there's always that one actor or those multiple actors that go up on stage and try to lecture the lower classes about how they should be treated better, even though the 1% doesn't seem to understand how middle lower class society works as a whole.
It's because they don't live in it.
Yeah,
Exactly. And through the lens of Ozymandias, it comes back to the whole idea of like, oh, well, if I kill 3 million people, I'm saving the world. It's like, well, you're still killing 3 million people, you despicable piece of shit.
Yeah, and he's making assumptions about people that like he would never actually put himself in the position of meeting. Like he just assumes that people are, inherently awful, and that without this kind of mass deception they'll end up destroying each other, and we'll talk about this later, like people have the capacity to do pretty well without like this kind of plan guiding them in that direction. Like this is besides what people will say, this comic book like does not have
Stefan, this podcast is not a visual medium. Shut the fuck up.
He said the joke. But
he said the joke.
Like this book, it does not have a uniformly miserable view of humanity. Like in fact, I would say it's quite optimistic, but unfortunately Ozymandias doesn't share that same assessment, so he kills 3 million people.
Well, like a way I'm just thinking about it now, like take it just like say like so that back then it was all about the Cold War and like threat of nuclear holocaust. If you're trying to like put it in a different lens of like how we could relate that to like say somewhere of today's, I'd say something like overpopulation, where it's people are like thinking, okay, overpopulation is a really bad issue, and I know a lot of people, or not, I don't know a lot of people, but I've heard a lot of people say that like a one way to solve it is just by killing a bunch of fucking people.
Well, look at like Darwinism and eugenics, right?
But that idea of let's just kill a bunch of people to make room for everybody else. It's the same idea, ish, or the same extreme solution to a problem that Ozymandias has with the.
Yeah, it's this kind of
exactly because Ozymandias is a fascist in his own ways. Again, like I was saying before, like look at like Darwinism and eugenics and the people that latch onto those shitty fucking ideals.
Yeah.
Like Ozymandias is just this giant fucking representation of some of the scummiest people in society that think that if we kill a bunch of people, then the species gets stronger. To quote Patton Oswalt, I love him so much.
But that's the thing is that he did that sarcastically. There's a lot of people who believe that overpopulation can be solved by just killing a fucking bunch of people.
Yeah,
Well,
and it's like,
and that's exactly it. Like that's exactly what I'm saying, is that there's a lot of people that seem to think that killing a bunch of people is either going to save or strengthen the species.
Well,
Yeah.
that's like,
And
it's even more relevant now with what's going on in the world right now. People
Yeah,
like there's so many people I've heard, like, or conspiracy theories I've heard of how the coronavirus is the start of that, the start of the only the strong survive. Weed out the weak. People who
Yeah.
people who are gonna die are gonna die, and it's
Yeah.
just how it is. Yeah, but yeah, so that's basically how Ozymandias is just this capitalist, egotistical fucking asshole
yeah.
who thinks he can solve everything by himself.
So we left pretty notable character for last, I think, and
Yeah,
we talked about him a little bit already, but Dr. Manhattan is the kind of the Superman analog here. Like
yeah.
he
Well, one of the lines in
is
the book is literally like, Superman has been found and he's an American.
yeah, he is this super powerful
wait. Was the Superman line just in the movie, or was that in the book? I don't remember.
I know
it was
in the
also
book.
it was also in the book. It was
Oh,
also
I think it was
okay.
I think it was on a newscast as well.
obviously like we mentioned, Dr. Manhattan is like indifferent to humanity, or at least that's the message he wants to project. Like he does have one tether to humanity, and that's Laurie. But once Laurie leaves him, he fucks off to Mars and ends up creating some of the most beautiful visual imagery in the entire book. One of the more interesting things about Dr. Manhattan is his conception of time, which is non-linear. Like he experiences multiple things at once from different periods of time. And in fact, that is much in the same way that the book itself is structured. The book is a non-linear thing with different events from different time periods happening at the same time. And the book, in fact, could be seen as being entirely through his point of view.
Yeah, he's basically just a god. That's how everybody sees him.
Yeah.
He can literally do anything. So if he can do anything, let's have him fix our problems. Which
Yeah,
is why Nixon sends him to Vietnam to win the war. Which in reality, in the real world, they do not win the war.
Oh no, that's very much not what happens in real life.
No.
But it's especially in I believe it's chapter 4, which is the book that not the book, but the chapter that focuses on him. It's one of the best, like one of the best, if not the best, issues in the entire series, because obviously it's told entirely through his perspective, and you see this like kind of non-linear and almost disjointed, but still like beautiful depiction of this kind of tragic life of somebody who like never really had the chance to like connect with humanity on any level by the time he hit 30, because he was just so disconnected at that point. And like it's really sad because like at some point he really wanted to connect with other people.
Well, like you said,
But
he's trying really hard to hold on to his humanity, but it's like take a look that chapter. What is it? I can't remember which chapter it is. That I think it's chapter
I want to say
4.
4.
4, I
I
think, is
think
the one where you see
Yeah,
it from his perspective, right? And
Yeah.
it's really interesting because you get to see like you really empathize with him because like he tries to connect and he tries to have these he tries his best, right?
Yeah.
But he's so, I guess, above it all, and like
I don't know. I
you
don't
can
think
just
he's
see.
capable of like relating to people at that point. Like he's literally incapable.
Well, exactly,
Oh,
because like
I,
he says multiple times, he knows exactly what's going to happen, so he has no fear. And a basic, like, one of the core human emotions and reactions to anything that happens in someone's life is fear.
Mm-hmm.
yeah. I think
Fear is even like
Right.
the theme that Ozymandias uses when he decides to save humanity. In his words, he says, "Oh, something more powerful and more devastating than a nuclear bomb is fear."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
I
because
I
Dr.
think
Manhattan doesn't have that, he just can't relate.
I think it also comes back to that thesis of like all these characters are a product of their environment. Dr. Manhattan, well, John, then Dr. Manhattan, becomes this product of the American military and the American weapons industry, right?
American
Like
imperialism.
yeah, well, essentially American imperialism, but like the fact that he goes from being just this normal, totally cool guy to
Your average Joe.
being, well, this average Joe to just becoming like a weapon for the U.S. military and just the United States in general.
Back to what I
Yeah.
was saying earlier, how he's like a tool to be used in this dick measuring contest, like you said, and it's been like that even before he was turned into Doctor Manhattan. His entire life, decisions have been made for him. Like his father was like
Exactly.
his father was like, no, you're not going to follow me into my what I've been doing my life because it's dying. Oh, okay, well I guess I'm gonna. So his father basically forced him to go to physics and get a
Physics, yeah.
PhD in physics
Which
and do all
probably
stuff.
leads to his like mindset of like, well, everything's preordained, so I'm not going to get arrested.
Exactly. And so like even when he becomes Doctor Manhattan, and or like because he has his accident, right, and he just destroyed, and he doesn't really actually put himself together for I think a couple months. But in that entire time after he turns into Doctor Manhattan, he never tells his father that he was alive. Because and I was telling you this earlier, Stefan, when we were talking about notes, that I think that's
Right.
just one way for him to just have one aspect of control in his life, considering
Mhm.
that he already has this perception of all his decisions have already been made for him. So it's just his one way of being in control.
It comes back to that thing that we keep saying about how every single one of these characters is a product of their environment. Like Rorschach is a product of his trauma. The comedian is a product of his monstrosities. Dr. Manhattan is a product of the U.S. imperialist system and the U.S. military and the U.S. warhead system. Sally is a product of Western world sexism as a whole.
As is
And
Laurie.
Laurie as well,
and
yeah.
Lori more so than Sally, because again, like I was saying about Lori, like she has to face this all on her own. She doesn't have anyone to even help her. She doesn't have anyone to
Mm.
support her. And Dan is just a product of the everyday average Joe,
Well,
just trying to
even
get
Dan
through
though,
life.
even Dan though, like I can't remember if this is in the movie or the book that he says that he was so he got a lot of inheritance, right? So he's this young guy who has presumably millions of dollars on his disposal. What
Mhm.
are you gonna do with that? You don't have to work the average job because you already are set for life.
Like,
Hence why he has this fascination with superheroes and why he looks up to Hollis growing up, right? And why when he eventually stops being a superhero, why he has these mental issues and why he has this midlife crisis.
Dan is essentially the middle class Bruce Wayne.
Yeah.
Like I remember you're saying that he was a copy of what character? I can't remember. You said it was from
Blue Beetle.
Blue Beetle.
Blue Beetle. Yeah, I was thinking he's more of a Batman allegory than Blue Beetle. I don't really know
Blue
a lot
Beetle.
about Blue Beetle, to be fair,
I
but like
I think I
considering that
think
he
of
literally he has his own like owl cave, he has all these gadgets. He's basically a billionaire, right? His parents died.
I think it's more so that eventually he became a Batman allegory than it was back then.
Yeah, because Blue Beetle like is much the same. He does have a lot of gadgets, and he does have like a lot like
Yeah.
that kind of ship thing that it just looks like a Blue Beetle, but here they made it look like an owl. Like
Yeah.
so it is a Blue Beetle allegory, but there is some semblance to Batman there. So what does this so what is it what does this book say about superheroes? Good, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
sure. Superheroes are definitely not portrayed in the best light in this
no,
Hmm.
no,
at
they're
all.
not.
Very dark.
Like, well, I think superheroes are portrayed in two different lights here. Superheroes are both portrayed as fascists as well as source of nostalgia for a past that either doesn't exist now or didn't exist in the first place.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Or kind of the in between, which is just like an outlet for people who have like a lot of shit going on.
Hmm.
Not like negative shit too. Like there is not one single superhero that does not have some sort of mental illness or like isn't kind of a monster.
Hmm.
Well, exactly. Like I said before, every single superhero in the book and in the franchise is more so lashing out at the environment around them.
Yeah, well,
Hmm.
like even like now, like every superhero has some form of god complex,
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
something along those lines, where they think they are the ones who have to do everything, or they're the ones that decide what's right and wrong. You
Yeah.
know,
Mhm.
they are the ones who are the executioners and the justice bringers of the people.
But like far from only being like a commentary on superheroes, it's also like obviously it makes a lot of commentary on our society
Well,
as
and the
now. Like
socio-political aspect of it too. Yeah.
yeah, you know, one kind of almost meta commentary that it makes is on like the concept of violence or the desensitization to violence. Like
I see even
'cause-
more precedent in the movie. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah,
well,
for sure.
the movie is strange, but we'll get to that. People just kind of accept violence as a thing of life, and especially like the vigilantes and the superheroes, like even the most like kind of human and the closest thing to heroic characters that we have, like Dan and Lori, are extremely violent.
Oh yeah.
Oh
Like,
yeah, what you were saying earlier, there was sexual tension when they're beating up a group of thugs.
yeah,
Like
they get off on violence, literally.
literally, yeah.
Kind of
Oh,
like Hooded Justice in
sorry, Larry, I'm having
Superman
some
era.
ED. I gotta go save a bunch of people from a burning building real quick.
Get this cat out of my tree! Finally, an erection!
It's me, can't get an erection, man. It was like the superhero landing, but like on his dick.
Oh, it's just like the opening of Scary Movie 4 when Charlie Sheen falls off that balcony and just lands first into the pavement.
Yes, it's exactly what I'm thinking of. Oh man, but yeah, like what one thing we should talk about as well is just how, and this goes back to like the chapter 4 about how you see the world through Dr. Manhattan's eyes, is how the book tells a story through very non-linear ways.
Well, and yeah, we were going to talk about how the book tells its story not just in a non-linear way, but also in a visual way. Because there's what I find really amazing about the book is that it goes from being kind of expository to being solely visual to being, very non-linear. Like there's so many ways that the story can be told, and Alan Moore just takes advantage of all of them
Well,
in very specific ways and so perfectly.
One really good example of that is any of the any of the parts of the book that have the newsstand with the kid reading the comic book.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Because that's not really touched on in the movie, but like in the book, it's a lot of you get to read a comic within a comic.
Yeah.
And the Tale of the Black Freighter, which is just a metaphor for the story of Watchmen.
Exactly, is right. So you take this story within a story that's happening and this kid is reading, and you relate it to the actual events that are happening throughout the comic, and a lot of that transfer, like that information, that way of storytelling is lost in adaptations of it, like the miniseries and the movie. And
well,
you lose a lot out of it too. Like there's a lot of things that you just.
I was gonna say I think the miniseries captures it incredibly well. It's just that I don't think the movie does, and I think that's a problem with adapting Watchmen to a movie. And we're gonna talk about that later. Is that it's like Watchmen is something that's more apt for television than it is for a film.
Yeah,
because film is such a giant time constraint.
If only because of the sheer amount of content, because like we haven't really mentioned it, this is a dense fucking book.
Oh, this is it's a lot to get through.
Oh, you couldn't fucking tell, guys. We've been talking about the book for an hour and a half.
Yeah. It like even like the inserts in between the issues, like they're not just kind of throwaway world building. They're fascinating in their own respect. This book kind of sneaks up on you with how fucking massive it is.
It really does. Like when I saw the thickness of the book, I'm like, because I've read a lot of books, right? And so like when I see a book that's that thick, I'm like, okay, that'll take me a couple days to read. This book has so much more than I thought it did.
Oh god.
Also, while we were kind of talking about the art, just because like if we don't mention it now, we probably will forget. Dave Gibbons is fucking incredible.
Dude, Dave Gibbons is so fucking good. But again, this comes back to how Dave Gibbons uses his art to tell the story in a visual way.
Yeah.
Like like with the sex scene and how like the flames symbolize like not even just like sexual but emotional release. No shit, the flames are calm.
It's a very subtle metaphor, you see.
It's a very subtle metaphor, yes. No, but like the thing is that like those little visual cues, even if they're not subtle, it's still just like, and I think that's the problem with Snyder's movie, and we'll talk about it later on, is that it lacks that same poignantness. Oh god, I can't speak. Like it lacks
poignance.
It's not just as poignant as the book is. I think the book has a lot to say. Like the thing with the sex scene in Watchmen 09 is that it's just unintentionally hilarious. Whereas in the book, like there's a lot it has to say about nostalgia. It has a lot to say about how superheroes are treated in this world. It has a lot to say about how these superheroes view themselves.
Yeah, let alone the individual things they're thinking about while it's going on too. Yeah.
Mhm.
That's exactly it. Like, it feels like there's so much going on, it doesn't feel like it's just kind of like half-assed together,
Hmm.
like the movie kind of does at points. Like,
Yeah.
it actually feels like there's a point to everything.
Mhm.
And I
Yeah.
think that really comes together with Dave Gibbons and the way he illustrates everything.
Well,
Yeah.
that's something I really liked about the writing of this book too, and like the imaging alone is fantastic. It tells us such a its own unique story, but like the writing as well is just there's no over of like how do I put this? Like there's nothing over the top. There's no extra lines, extra dialogue, extra words, extra explanations that make it not as efficient, I guess, in the way he writes it. If
Yeah.
that makes sense, you know what I mean?
But
Like
but yet it's
every
still very
word,
like
every
lyrical and artistic.
yes,
You know?
it's very much like
Yeah.
every single word that is said, it has a meaning and a direct point. It's very not beat around the bush, very blunt in its approach.
Mhm.
Oh, exactly. And I think that's the thing we're going to talk about with the movie, because the movie is very faithful to the comic in terms
Yes,
of adapting everything,
yes, it is.
but it feels like it's not faithful in the sense that it doesn't have the same depth, it doesn't have the same power as the book does. Like, the
No.
book is such, like, I read the book when I was fucking 12, and that book, I swear to God, if any book has ever shaped the way I viewed the world as my life has gone on, it's fucking Watchmen.
Same.
Because every single fucking time I read that book, I either get something new out of it or I feel different about it.
Hmm.
Like when you're 12 and you read it, you're like, man, Rorschach's kind of fucking cool because he's an edgy anti-hero, am I right? And then by the time you hit college, you're like, man, Rorschach's a piece of shit, dude.
Yeah.
And I think it really comes down to just how important like any piece of literature really is, when it just hits you so hard and it just develops the way that you see the world, and it just makes you realize just it really helps you grow as a human being. And I find that there's few pieces of media out there that are just as impactful in my life as Watchmen is. Like, I would honestly say like Watchmen is one of my top 3 favorite books, not comic books, but books
Books
of
in
Mhm.
all
general.
time.
Same.
There's a reason why this is taught in universities.
With a lot of comics from kind of this era, think Dark Knight Returns or any of the books that tried to ape Watchmen, like they have
Yeah.
a very nihilistic view of human nature. And Watchmen has characters that espouse the same way, so you could be forgiven for coming out of it thinking that like, oh, Watchmen, like the takeaway from Watchmen is that human beings are shit. And that's certainly Ozymandias' worldview, which is why he thinks he has to shepherd humanity into the new future by killing 3 million people.
It's also I feel like
Uh,
it's also the comedian's view as well
oh,
in
definitely,
a way.
it's definitely similar to the comedian's view, but like throughout the whole book, you get these little glimpses into like ordinary people's lives, and also Dan and Laurie, although there's a lot going on there, and they're very kind to each other. Like they're not needlessly cruel to each other,
Well, and
and
that's why I like those scenes of or those scenes, fucking those pages of the newsstand stuff,
mm-hmm,
because
because
it's just regular New Yorkers interacting with each other. It's just
yeah,
oh
Yeah.
I gotta get my paper. Oh I got my coffee. Oh hey Sal, how's the plant? Or oh here kid
yeah,
here read this issue of the book or whatever. You know it's real. It feels real.
Yeah,
yeah,
like
and
it feels raw. Like it feels
Yes.
like you're a fly on the wall on human nature.
yeah, and that's not to say the world of Watchmen is like sunshine and rainbows. It's clearly
No.
shitty, but
Yes.
like the people in it are most like not necessarily inherently good, but they're just regular people living their lives, and like most of them are not inclined to be amoral assholes.
Well,
Like,
that's why it's so good, right? Because like especially with like the more recent stuff, right? Comic book heroes, every comic book hero has to have either some sort of superpower, like oh I can run really fast, or I can fly, I can teleport, whatever it is. And in this universe, it's like no, these are just regular people.
yeah,
Yeah.
Obviously,
and
besides Doctor Manhattan, but that's an extreme case.
but like even with like the human characters, like the psychologist, like for all his faults, is a kind person.
Yeah.
The news people, the newsstand guy, for all his faults, and there are many, very kind person. Like offers his coat to the kid reading Black Freighter, the last thing that happens in that spot before the squid drops squid drops is all the human characters, like, by which I mean the not superheroes, try to break up a fight.
Yeah.
They're adverse to violence and cruelty, and they just want to help each other out. So clearly, we in like the last kind of dying moments of these characters, we see that Ozymandias is full of shit, and human beings like are not just savage blank slates that, you know, have to be guided. They're generally, if not good, then, you know, they don't need to be treated like wild animals that will tear each other apart.
No,
Mhm.
and it comes back, Stefan, I can't believe I'm bringing this up, but I feel like you'll understand this more than Brandon. But, like, it comes back to the Lippmann and Dewey argument,
Yeah,
actually.
kind of actually.
Yeah.
So real communication hours here. Uh, but
Or I'll just check
Walter
out next time.
Walter
Yeah,
Lippmann
yeah.
was
This
Walter
is a
Lippmann
great
was like
time for you to... Sorry. Brandon, this is a great time for you to go take a shit. Stefan?
Walter Lippmann was like kind of a communication theorist who kind of came up with the theory that journalism is there to kind of shepherd the stupid ignorant public to making correct informed decisions. And I forget what Dewey's whole deal was, so maybe you can inform us on that.
That was my favorite 15-year-old son.
Because if I remember correctly, Lippmann was more of the opinion that humans are only really good for voting and that's it.
Pretty much.
Whereas
Yikes.
Dewey basically saw much more potential in human nature than Lippmann ever did.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, like it's just led to this giant debate in communication culture where it's like, like who's got the stronger argument. And personally, I think you and I both, Stefan, seem to believe that Dewey most certainly does.
Yeah,
And I think Alan Moore, and I think through this book, Moore mostly stands by Dewey than he does by Lippmann, even though he does have characters that do stand by Lippmann.
yeah, Lippmann would be like definitely in line with the more, I guess, liberal but extremely cynical approach of somebody like Ozymandias.
Because again, like I think what's really interesting about Ozymandias is that yeah, like he proclaims that he's a liberal, but at the end of the day, he's merely just. It comes back to this idea of how politics, especially in the Western world, is just a power game
Yep.
between these two different parties. And Stefan,
Neither
neither
neither of
you
which are
nor I,
fundamentally different. Yeah.
yeah, neither of which are fundamentally different, but neither you nor I are centrists, which is a big thing to bring up here.
Marx is cool.
But Marx is awesome. Marx is fucking lit, fam.
Marx
But
is my dad.
My
your
dad's
dad
named
is
Mark too.
Alan Moore mostly centers on Dewey's argument that humans have a lot more potential than what Lippmann seems to believe, which is merely nothing but, just going out there and voting for what. And like the thing with Lippmann is that he's so fucking cynical that like, for him saying, "Oh, humans are only good for voting," just blindly voting for whoever they fucking well please. Dewey, and especially with Moore's work on Watchmen, like they clearly seem to believe that humanity has so much more than just the ability to go out there and punch a hole in a fucking ballot. They're not number crunchers. They're real people with real emotions, with real flaws that they need to overcome and they want to overcome, but they can't. And it doesn't just break everyone else's heart, but it breaks theirs as well. And we've talked about it with all the characters. But yeah, I think this movie, or sorry, fuck, I got Stefan Salehio's "I'm gonna fuck up what the medium is" disease. This
Yay.
book, and its subsequent adaptations, at least the book, believe that you know that humans are capable of so much more than what a lot of cynics and neocons seem to believe that they are. And it comes back again, like I was saying earlier. A lot of these ideologies and beliefs seem to come down to the idea of controlling other people, and seem to come down to the idea of like control as a form of political manipulation. Because both conservatives and liberals are both incredibly fucking guilty of it.
What we should move on to is like kind of how the message of this comic has gotten so distorted.
Oh,
Mhm.
fucking Mark Millar can kiss my fucking cock.
So after Watchmen comes out, and like this is also true of other Alan Moore work. So after stuff like Watchmen or Killing Joke comes out, you had a lot of people inspired by them, which makes a lot of sense. So on one hand, you have people like Grant Morrison and Neil Gaiman who took a lot of the metaphysical elements and made like really interesting stuff. And you have people that took like the darker, grittier elements and did some interesting stuff with it, like debatably Garth Ennis. So on the other hand, from them, you had people who saw the grimdark edge of Watchmen, and they figured, oh, okay, that's what makes this deep. So we're just gonna go full in on the ultra violence and like the explicit sexual content and the swearing, and that by itself will make it deep and mature. So that's how you get shit like The Boys or anything that Mark Millar has ever written. It's just viscerally unpleasant, is what it is. Like
Even the boys isn't an exact adaptation of something like Watchmen because they still have fucking superpowers.
Well, The Boys is like also says absolutely nothing interesting.
The Boys is like the comedian of comic books and TV shows. Same with Kick-Ass in the comic book, I mean. In the sense that they're so fucking nihilistic and angry, and they just take their anger out on everyone else.
No, but like the Boys is basically, oh, what if Superman was evil, and that's as deep as it gets.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with that movie Brightburn that came out last year.
Yes.
Yeah. Like especially with Mark Millar, and I'm gonna focus him because he's never done anything aside from maybe Red Son. He's never done anything that I think is worth a shit. The closest inspiration he's taken from Watchmen is actually probably the Marvel Civil War comics he did, and even that seems extremely surface level. Like it doesn't any allegory that you can make to it in real life is extremely clumsy and not really a one-to-one, and it just becomes an excuse to see superheroes punch each other out. Like every one of his comics is just an exercise in misery. But I think we've kind of exhausted
I think we're done on the comic book.
Chris, do you recommend Watchmen, the book?
Yes, of course I recommend Watchmen. Like I said, it's been a giant development point in my entire life, and I think as I reread it as I get older, I seem to either get something new out of it or I seem to develop more from it.
But yeah, I would also definitely recommend this book. Like this is my first time reading it for preparing for this podcast, and I gotta say I am glad I read it the age I am at now, because I feel like if I like you said earlier, Chris, when you read it when you were 12 and you didn't really understand everything to its full extent, right? So I'm glad I read it the age I am now, because I feel like I have a deeper understanding of what it's actually about, rather than, oh, Rorschach's an edgy teenager, or whatever the fuck it is. You know what I mean?
And that's exactly it. And it's like I don't regret the fact that I read it at such a young age. But I wish I waited a little longer. I wish I waited until I could fully understand it.
This is definitely one of those comics that you need to have some kind of idea of how the world works.
Well, not even just some kind of idea of how the world works. You need fucking context.
Well, like, and here's the other thing, right? Like, you guys know more about, like, I'm assuming you guys know more about like history, like stuff about the Cold War and the Vietnam stuff, and a little bit more than I do. And so you guys are gonna have more of a understanding of that aspect of the comics as well. But like,
I know a thing or two about a thing or two.
Exactly. But like I definitely do recommend this book for anyone who is interested in like just having something really deep, and just not something you can just pick off the shelf at any library and start reading. You have to put some time commitment into it and enjoy it, because it's just so good.
Yeah. I recommend Watchmen harder than I recommended anything in the show so far.
Oh yeah, I'm pretty sure this is one of your, like, you were looking forward to this episode for so long.
Yeah, it's
well, Stefan and I have been wanting to do this episode for so long now.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we even talked about it last year.
Yeah, oh yeah, we talked about it last year. And like, if anything good's come out of the coronavirus, which is not much, it's that we were able to do this Watchmen episode because we had time.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, can you imagine if we were all working like full-time jobs during the summer right now trying to do this shit?
Wouldn't have happened.
It just wouldn't happen. we would have waited until school started up again. And even then, it would have been hard.
You have that beautiful 3-week window in September, and then you go right into constant exams and projects.
Yep. That's pretty accurate.
But yeah, we're gonna take a break now, or the end of the episode, whatever we choose to do. We'll be back in a bit.
Hi again. You can probably tell by the substantially superior audio quality that I am recording this at a later point in time. Now, when we ended this episode, we didn't actually know we were ending the episode, so we didn't think to do a lead-off. Janky recording processes will do that to you. Now, it all kind of lays upon my shoulders, so I'm just going to go ahead and do a quick lead-off, and then you can all be right on your way. We are Sequel Decay. You can find us on Twitter at DK Sequel, and you can also find us on Facebook. You can also find our individual Twitter accounts on our Twitter page. We are hosted on Anchor. You can also find us on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play. You can also find us on Stitcher, as well as YouTube. And you stay safe out there.